A cocky freelance musician, a no-nonsense press secretary, and a shiny grand piano. What started as a snarky jab turned into a scene that hushed the room and bruised an ego. It all went down in the fancy lobby of the Willard Intercontinental Hotel in Washington, D.C., during a political gala buzzing with chatter and bright lights. Karoline Leavitt, 27, the youngest White House press secretary ever, glided through the crowd with a tight smile. Her sharp eyes hid a story few knew about. To most, she was the tough voice of the Trump crew, but deep down, music had once been her thing, something she'd tucked away years ago. Then the doors flew open and Ethan Caldwell strutted in. A big-shot pianist loved by the left, he wore a smug grin and an attitude to match. The clinking glasses and low hum of voices stopped as he made a beeline for the piano in the corner. Without so much as a hello, Ethan locked eyes with Karoline and called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Can the press secretary actually play, or does she just bang on keys for Trump?" A few liberal journalists cracked up, pulling out their phones to record. Karoline felt their stares like a spotlight, but she didn't budge, hands balled into fists. Ethan tilted his head, pushing harder. "Come on, show us some real skill, if you got any." The crowd went still, the tension thick. This wasn't just any night. It was a face-off that'd flip everything upside down. Ethan Caldwell stood there, hands chilling on the grand piano, staring at Karoline Leavitt like she was his next target. The crowd's laughter still floated around the Willard Intercontinental lobby, mixing with the clink of drinks and the buzz of nosy guests. He didn't hurry. Ethan knew how to milk a moment, turning it into his own little show. To him, this wasn't just a dig. It was a shot at knocking a conservative star off her perch right in front of everyone. "Don't be shy, Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice slick but sharp. "I hear you're great at dodging reporters. Surely you've got some skills to liven up that White House desk, right?" He tapped a few keys, random notes bouncing around like a challenge. "Or is it all just talk?" Karoline froze, feeling the ground shift under her. The chandeliers overhead lit up her sleek black dress, but it felt more like a shield now. She glanced around. Liberal journalists with phones ready and smirks plastered on, waiting for her to flop. A couple of conservative politicians muttered to each other, looking nervous. She'd handled tough spots before, but this was different. Ethan wasn't just poking at her job. He was hitting something personal, something she'd locked away ages ago. Ethan stepped back from the piano, arms wide like he was owning the stage. "Picture this," he said, his voice loud enough to grab the room. The White House press secretary, Trump's go-to gal, sits down and plays something. What's it gonna be? A New Hampshire tune or just some awkward key smashing? The laughter kicked up again, louder and sharper. A reporter yelled, "Play something, Karoline!" like it was a game show. Karoline felt her face heat up. She was used to pressure, grueling White House briefings, TV spots defending Trump's moves. But this was a whole other beast. Ethan didn't just want her to mess up. He wanted her embarrassed, a punchline for the cameras and social media. She took a deep breath, trying to keep cool, but an old memory flickered. Back in New Hampshire as a kid, Karoline had spent hours on the church's beat-up piano. Its faded keys were her escape from stress. She'd play hymns, then figure out classics from library books she'd borrowed. But growing up, her family pushed her toward politics, practical, not artsy dreams. She shoved her love for music aside, seeing it as a soft spot that didn't fit the hard-edge image she'd built with Trump. Now facing Ethan, those old melodies buzzed in her head, reminding her of who she used to be. She flicked her eyes off Ethan for a sec, spotting her Trump team nearby. Her aide Mark shook his head a little, mouthing, "Don't do it, Karoline, it's a setup. The media'll eat you alive if you screw up." She knew he was right. If she played and bombed, the headlines would scream about Trump's press secretary tanking on stage. But if she walked away, Ethan would come out on top. He'd call her a chicken, and the left would have a new stick to swing at the administration. Ethan caught her pause, and his grin stretched wider. He slid back to the piano, playing a quick chunk of Moonlight Sonata, the deep notes mocking her. "See," he said, stopping to stare her down, "that's real music, not political noise. But I get it. You're too tied up pushing Trump's old-school ideas to learn." The crowd buzzed, a few clapping, while Karoline's throat tightened. She glanced at her hands, fingers that used to glide over keys, now more comfortable typing and talking. Then Trump's words rang in her mind. "Never let him see you weak, Karoline. Fight back, always fight back. She'd lived by that through every political scrap, from her time with Elise Stefanik to White House gigs. How was this any different? Just another opponent, another angle. Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping but still loud enough for everyone. You know, I've played for causes, stuff you and your boss roll your eyes at. Bet you don't even get what real art is. Prove me wrong if you've got it in you. He pointed at the piano like it was a showdown waiting to happen. The pressure piled on, the crowd's laughs humming in her ears, phones flashing. Mark whispered again, "Walk away, Karoline, don't let him get you like this." But Ethan's cocky stare, so sure she'd bail, sparked something in her. She couldn't let him walk away the winner, not tonight, not with everyone watching. Karoline took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Ethan. "Fine," she said, her voice quiet but steady, cutting through the chatter. "Watch yourself." Karoline Leavitt stood there, her gaze glued to Ethan Caldwell, her words, "Watch yourself," hanging in the fancy Willard Intercontinental lobby. The crowd went dead quiet for a second, then murmurs rippled through the silk-covered tables and sparkling chandeliers. Ethan smirked, but it wasn't as solid now. A hint of doubt flashed across his face, like he'd just figured out he might have kicked off something he couldn't handle. "Oh, awesome," Ethan said, his voice still smooth but a little shaky. He turned back to the piano, giving its lid a pat like he was rolling out the welcome mat. "I'm all ears." "Can't wait to see this, Miss Leavitt. Or should I call you the key-banging spokesperson?" Ethan quipped. A couple of chuckles popped up from the liberal reporter's corner, but they didn't have the same energy as before. The crowd was on edge, and Karoline could feel every pair of eyes locked on her. She took a small step forward, her heels clicking against the shiny wood floor. Inside, though, she wasn't so sure. Her heart was thumping hard, like it might bust out of her chest. This wasn't the White House briefing room where she could throw facts and quick comebacks to shut things down. This was wide-open territory where any mistake would get picked apart fast. She shot a look at Mark, her aide, still hovering close by. His eyes were practically begging, "Don't do it, Karoline. Bail now." She got what he meant. If she tanked this, it'd be a golden ticket for the liberal media, a clip they'd loop to roast her and Trump. But then Ethan's jab replayed in her head. "Bet you don't even know what real art is." That wasn't just a tease, it stung her pride deep. Did he really think she was some shallow political robot with no soul, no skills? Her fists tightened, nails pressing into her palms. No way was she letting him walk away with that win. She couldn't let him make her a joke, not in front of this crowd, her crew, or herself. Another memory hit her, not the church piano this time, but her first real test under fire working for Elise Stefanik. A liberal reporter had cornered her at a briefing once, slapping her with the Trump's clueless mouthpiece label. She'd held her ground, firing back with cool, sharp answers that left him quiet. Trump had given her a pat on the shoulder after saying, "You got guts, Karoline. Never let him drag you down." Now staring at Ethan, she thought, how's this any different? Just another fight, another opponent. But then a wave of doubt crept in. How long had it been since she'd even touched a piano? Those late nights practicing in a tiny New Hampshire room felt like a blurry dream. Her hands were used to tapping out emails and holding mics, not sliding over keys. What if she messed up? What if she blanked halfway through? She could already see it, her fumbling at the piano, Ethan laughing, the left cheering, and Trump's team groaning, probably plotting her exit. "It's cool," Ethan cut in, snapping her out of it. He stepped closer, his tone fake nice but dripping with a jab. "I get it. Not everyone's got the nerve for the spotlight. Maybe stick to those scripted talking points." He shrugged and turned away like it was done, but his eyes darted back over his shoulder, checking her next move. That did it. Karoline felt a spark flare up, not fear anymore, but pure fire. He thought she'd bolt. He thought she was that fragile, no chance. She'd face bigger than Ethan. Reporters throwing accusations, politicians calling her a tool, and she'd never flinched. This wasn't the moment to fold. She took a deep breath, shoving every worry aside. "I don't need you begging me twice," she said, her voice steady and loud, slicing through the crowd's hum. She marched to the piano, each step firm even if it felt heavy. The room went quiet, everyone holding their breath. Mark's eyes popped wide in disbelief, while Ethan spun back around, that smirk on his face starting to crack. "You for real?" he asked, but his tone wasn't so cocky now. Karoline didn't bother replying. She pulled out the chair, sat down at the grand piano, and let her hands rest lightly on the slick black and white keys. The Willard Intercontinental lobby's chandelier light glowed overhead, and the crowd's whispers faded out, leaving just the sound of her heartbeat thumping away. Ethan Caldwell stood a few feet off, arms crossed, his smirk hanging on but looking shaky, like he wasn't so sure anymore. He'd pushed her into this corner, and now she had to answer, not with words, but with notes. She shut her eyes for a beat, breathing deep to calm the shake in her hands. The cool keys under her fingers brought back faint echoes, afternoons in that New Hampshire church, playing easy hymns before sneaking into tougher songs from beat-up library books. She hadn't played in forever, but her hands still knew the drill. They had to. She wasn't backing out now. Karoline opened her eyes and her fingers started moving. She picked Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, a track that wasn't just pretty, but had some real grit, all American and bold, just like her. The first notes came out slow, a little unsure, like she was testing herself. The sound floated through the room, soft but crisp, pulling the crowd in from mild interest to dead silence. Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard that she'd actually started, but he kept his smug look, muttering something to a guy nearby. Then Karoline hit her stride. She leaned in, her right hand flying over tricky chords while her left laid down deep, solid beats. The music kicked into gear, high notes climbing, low ones hitting hard, like a story spilling out through the keys. She wasn't just playing, she was feeling every bit of it. The crowd picked up on it too. Some leaned forward, eyes big, phones that were ready to clown her now filming in shock. Mid-song, a memory flashed. A rainy night in New Hampshire at 15. Hunched over that old piano in a cramped room. Her mom, worn out from a long day, had listened to a tune Karoline made up. "You've got something special, Karoline," she'd said, her voice rough but kind. "Don't let anyone take that from you." But Karoline had let it slip away. For her family, for politics, for the tough front she thought she needed. Now facing Ethan and the crowd, she saw she'd been off. That gift wasn't a flaw, it was her edge. The music built up, heading toward Rhapsody in Blue's big finish. Karoline's fingers zipped across the keys, fast and spot on, no shaky hands anymore. She'd found her groove again. The sound rushed out like a wave, washing away every bit of nerves and second-guessing. She didn't glance at Ethan or the crowd, just her and the piano, like back in the day. But she could tell they were hooked. The vibe in the room flipped from snarky giggles to straight-up respect. Ethan quit mumbling. He stood there, arms dropping, staring at Karoline with a look that was part stunned, part annoyed. His smirk was toast. He was a pro musician, gigging all over the world. But what Karoline was pulling off wasn't just skill. It had heart he couldn't brush off. A conservative politician in the crowd jumped up, clapping mid-song, unable to hold it in. Others joined in, applause popping up here and there, breaking the hush. Karoline didn't even clock it. She was deep in the finale, high notes weaving with big, bold chords, wrapping up in a way that felt wild and alive. She tilted her head with the beat, hair slipping across her face, sweat dotting her forehead. This wasn't the White House Karoline, the slick, put-together mouthpiece. This was the old Karoline back when music was her whole world. She hit that last note, its sound bouncing around the lobby before drifting off. She sat there, hands still on the keys, catching her breath. For a split second, the room went quiet, like everyone was waiting for someone to snap out of it. Then the applause hit hard, not just a trickle this time, but a full-on roar rolling through the place. Conservative politicians jumped up, cheering loud, and even a few liberal reporters clapped, though you could tell they weren't thrilled about it. Mark, her aide, stood there with his jaw dropped, his worry flipping to a proud grin. "Karoline, that was awesome," someone shouted from one side, setting off more hollers. Karoline glanced up, locking eyes with the crowd for the first time. She saw shocked faces, impressed smiles, and puzzled looks from the ones who'd been laughing at her earlier. She didn't grin, not out of cockiness, but because she was still wrapping her head around it. She'd done it. She'd pushed past the nerves, the digs, and turned it into something huge. Then her eyes landed on Ethan. He was still standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, his face tight like he was trying to play it cool. But she caught it. The quick flash in his eyes, the way he chewed his lip to mask whatever he was really feeling. He hadn't seen this coming. He'd wanted her to flop, to be the butt of the joke, but now he was the one stuck. Ethan clapped slow, the sound swallowed up by the crowd's noise. "Not bad," he said. loud enough for her to catch, but that smug edge was gone. Karoline got up, sliding the chair back. Her legs wobbled a bit, but she kept her shoulders square. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The piano had done the talking. The cheers still rang through the Willard Intercontinental lobby as Karoline Leavitt stepped away from the keys, her steps steadier than when she'd sat down. The echo of Rhapsody in Blue hung in the air, a strong vibe that kept the room buzzing. She didn't look at Ethan Caldwell right off. She didn't need to. The crowd's reaction, the stunned stares from folks who'd smirked before, said everything. She'd flipped his challenge into her win. Ethan stood a few feet from the piano, hands still in his pockets, but he looked stiffer now. That smirk he'd been rocking was history, swapped for a blank look he was forcing. He clapped again, slow and uneven, drowned out by the crowd's thunder. "Not bad," he said again, a little louder, like he was trying to act like he still had the upper hand. But nobody bought it. His eyes flicked to Karoline, then darted off, like holding her gaze would mean admitting he'd lost big time. Karoline stopped near where she'd started, turning to face the crowd. The applause had settled into a solid wave, mixed with yells from conservative politicians. "That's our Karoline!" A middle-aged guy, maybe a senator, shouted, pumping his fist. Others nodded, slapping each other's backs, eyes shining with pride. Mark stepped up, tapping her shoulder. "You had me freaking out," he said, but his grin showed how stoked he was. "But man, you nailed it." Not everyone was clapping, though. Over in one corner, a bunch of liberal reporters huddled, whispering. Phones were still up, but the smirks were gone. A woman with short, red-dyed hair shook her head, typing fast. "She's better than I figured," she muttered to a buddy, sounding surprised but ticked off. "Doesn't change who she works for, though." Another guy nodded, but his eyes stuck on Karoline like he was rethinking her. They might not vibe with her, but they couldn't act like that didn't just happen. The lobby's noise dialed down a bit, but the buzz stuck around. A few folks came up to Karoline, shaking her hand. "I had no clue you could play like that," an older woman, probably a conservative donor, said, her voice full of wonder. "You made us proud." Karoline gave a small nod and a faint smile, not cocky, just relieved. The adrenaline was still pumping, but she had it locked down now. Then she turned to Ethan. He'd shifted away from the piano, standing with a little crew, probably his buddies or fans. A young guy in the group patted his shoulder, whispering something, but Ethan just shrugged, acting chill. "I told you," he said, loud enough for Karoline to hear. "Not bad for a conservative." But the line fell flat, no bite to it. His group swapped awkward looks. A woman in a green dress tilted her head toward Karoline and murmured, "She totally threw you off, Ethan." He didn't answer right away. He took a sip from a glass someone handed him, scanning the room like he was hunting for a way to flip the script. But there wasn't one. The crowd had picked Karoline's side, not just the conservatives, but even some neutrals who doubted her. An older guy, maybe an independent journalist, walked up to her, holding a small mic. "Miss Leavitt, where'd you learn to play like that?" he asked, sounding legit impressed. "That was unreal." Karoline flashed a soft smile. "Thanks," she said. "I picked it up a while back and never really let it go." Meanwhile, outside the lobby, phones were going nuts. Social media was blowing up. Trump fans on X were posting clips of Karoline playing, captions like, "Our press secretary just smoked the left with pure talent." A big account wrote, "Karoline Leavitt, MAGA's hidden ace, who's laughing now?" Hashtags like Karoline plays and MAGA music took off, racking up shares fast. Even some neutral folks jumped in. "Not a Trump guy, but she's got skills. Gotta give it to her." Ethan glanced over his shoulder like he could feel the tide turning out there. He frowned, gripping his glass tighter. "They're making too much of it," he said to his crew, but it didn't sound convincing. He'd wanted Karoline to be the punchline, but now he was the one boxed in. His young buddy smirked. "You called that one wrong, Ethan. She didn't just play, she owned it." Karoline caught it but didn't bite. She gave Ethan one last look, calm, steady, cutting right through. She didn't need to say anything. Her performance had shredded his swagger. Ethan met her stare, and for the first time, that cool front of his cracked. He turned away, mumbling to his group, then headed for the drink table, as if he needed an out. Ethan slipped away from her stare, and the Willard Intercontinental lobby eased back into its normal groove. The buzz from Karoline Leavitt's performance still hung around, though, laughter and chatter picking up, livelier now. People's eyes shifted to her, Not with smirks or nosiness anymore, but with a mix of respect and shock. Karoline stood there, shaking hands with a few supporters as the congrats rolled in, but her head was starting to clear. She'd just pulled off something she hadn't even thought she could do. Mark, her aide, stuck close, all chill now after his earlier freakout. "You know," he said with a little laugh, "I was bracing for the liberal media to rip us apart tonight, but you flipped it into a huge W." He flashed his phone, the screen glowing with X notifications. "Check this, they're calling you the MAGA queen. That video's already passed 10,000 views." Karoline peeked at it, stuff like Caroline Leavitt shuts down the left with keys. And "this is why we're on top." She cracked a small smile but kept quiet. She hadn't played to win anyone over. She'd done it for herself. A bunch of Trump fans crowded around, buzzing with hype. "You showed that liberal who's boss," an older guy said, clapping her shoulder. "He tried to make you look bad, but you made us proud," a woman chimed in. "I'm telling everyone, our press secretary's a legit artist." Karoline nodded, thanking them, but her eyes roamed the room, looking for Ethan Caldwell. He'd slipped out of sight, probably dodging her in the spotlight he couldn't steer anymore. Out on social media, the wave kept rolling. Conservative posts were everywhere, spinning her performance into a MAGA flex. A big account dropped. "Karoline doesn't just talk, she delivers." The left tried to dunk on her, and they flopped. Even some neutral folks hopped in. Not a Trump fan, but she's got skills, no denying that. Not everyone was clapping, though. A liberal reporter posted, "Playing piano doesn't fix Trump's messed up policies. Don't fall for this trick." But even that jab couldn't cool off the moment. Karoline stepped away from the crowd, finding a quiet spot by a big window overlooking DC's streets. She needed a second to breathe, to think. The lobby's hum faded into the background, and all she heard was her heartbeat settling down, nice and steady. She'd done it, not just outplaying Ethan, but kicking her own doubts to the curb. She thought back to sitting at that piano, those first shaky notes when she was sure she'd bomb. But she hadn't. She'd grabbed back a piece of herself she'd ditched since her New Hampshire days. She pulled out her phone and texted her husband, Nicholas Rio. "Guess what I just pulled off?" She smiled, picturing his reaction. The quiet guy, 32 years older, always her biggest cheerleader. Later, she left the gala and headed to their little apartment outside DC. Stepping in, she saw Nicholas in the living room, their months-old son snoozing in a crib nearby. "I heard about it," Nicholas said, getting up to hug her. "Social media's losing it over you." Karoline laughed, finally feeling at ease for the first time that night. "I didn't mean for it to blow up like this," she said, plopping down by the old piano in the corner, something she'd barely touched since they moved in. Nicholas tilted his head, nudging her. "Play it. I want to hear." She paused, then slid onto the bench, hands resting on the keys. She played a short stretch of Rhapsody in Blue. Not the bold, loud version from the lobby, but soft, just for them. Nicholas grinned, and she glanced at their son, thinking one day he'd hear this story. When she stopped, Nicholas asked, "How you holding up?" Karoline thought for a sec, then said, "Like I just figured out who I am again." She used to think music was a soft spot, something that didn't fit her tough press secretary gig. But tonight flipped that. It wasn't a flaw to hide. It was a strength she could roll with, even in the roughest political fights. She stood up, peering out the window into the dark. Ethan might have lost tonight, but she knew the left wouldn't chill. They'd come at her and Trump with something else. She wasn't scared, though. She'd face down a challenger, not with talking points or plans, but with her real self, and she'd come out on top. Tomorrow, she'd walk into the briefing room with a fresh vibe, not just Trump's voice, but Caroline Leavitt, the one who'd just shown the world she wasn't only a political figure. She was an artist, a scrapper, and she wasn't letting anyone forget it. The piano still hummed in her head, proof she could handle anything, even with everyone watching. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell slipped out of the Willard Intercontinental lobby without a word, his steps quick like he couldn't wait to ditch the cheers still ringing behind him. DC's streetlights hit his face. No cocky smirk now, just a frown he couldn't shake. He'd lost, not in some argument he could spin or a word fight he could win, but in the one thing he owned, music. And the one who beat him? Caroline Leavitt, someone he'd written off as a stiff political drone. He ducked into a little bar a few blocks from the hotel where his crew was hanging out after the event. The air was warm, fuzzy under yellow lights with soft jazz playing, but it didn't ease the sting in his pride. Ethan dropped into a chair, ordered a whiskey, and took a big gulp before anyone could say a word. His friends, a couple musicians, a freelance reporter, and a social activist, watched him, their eyes bouncing between curiosity and awkward vibes. Mia, the one in the green dress who'd been with him in the lobby, spoke up first, her voice soft but digging a little. "You okay?" Ethan shrugged, trying to play it off. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, but his tone came out sharper than he wanted. "She played a tune, big deal. The crowd's just hyping it up too much." He took another swig of whiskey, like the burn could drown out what he didn't want to admit. But Liam, the younger guy in the group, wasn't letting it slide. He smirked, leaning in. "Hyping it up? Ethan, she smoked you. You dared her to step up, and she didn't just play. She had the whole place on its feet, cheering. You read her wrong." Liam shook his head, half teasing, half real. "I've never seen you that shook on stage. She totally threw you off." Ethan's grip tightened on his glass, his eyes narrowing. He wanted to push back, to say Liam was off base, that it was just some cheap conservative hype to prop Karoline up. But he couldn't. He'd stood there, watching her nail Rhapsody in Blue with a vibe and heart even he, a pro musician, had to respect.
This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.